All right, thank you. Good afternoon. We're going to call this meeting of the TRPA Regional Planning Committee to order. The date is Wednesday, March 27th, 2024, and it is about 1:10. First item on the agenda is roll call to determine quorum.
Miss Alding,
Here.
Miss Dis, Miss Gustafson,
Here.
Mr. Honigman,
Here.
Miss Loomer,
Here.
Mr. Settlemeyer,
Here.
Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Now we'll go over the remote and in-person meeting rules for the day. For the members of the public who are joining us remotely, to observe the meeting, go to trpa.gov. Under the calendar header, click on Governing Board Hybrid Meeting for March 27th, 2024. There you'll find a link to the public webinar hosted on Zoom. To address committee members directly with your comments, raise your hand in Zoom by clicking the raise hand at the bottom of your screen at the appropriate agenda item. With your hand raised, you'll be unmuted by TRPA staff and have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you've used the dial-in number to join us by telephone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand and be unmuted. For items that are agendized as information only, we'll hear public comment during the general public comment period at the end of the meeting. For items that are agendized for action or possible action, we'll hear public comment before the committee takes any action. To remote committee members, if you wish to speak, please also raise your hand in Zoom. You'll find the hand icon on the bottom of your screen. Remote committee members may not use the chat box to make any comments or to have sidebar conversations. Please, everyone, remember to mute your mic unless speaking to cut down on background noise. Finally, I'd like to ask that all remote members turn on their cameras if they're able. Members of the public who have joined us in person, please raise your hand at the appropriate time for public comment, and you'll be called on to speak, called to the front to speak. To ensure that everyone has time to make their desired comment, you can agree with the previous member rather than making comments that repeat what others have said. Committee members who are in person, please raise your hand if you wish to comment and speak clearly into the microphone in front of you. If you're viewing the webinar on a personal computer, wow, such a mouthful, please ensure that your microphone and speakers are turned off to prevent audio feedback into the room. If committee members need to ask clarifying questions during presentations, please do so. But, nope, that's it. We'll save our deliberation until after the presentation is complete. All right. After all that, next item is the approval of the agenda. John, are there any changes to the agenda?
No changes, Mr. Chairman.
Great, thank you. We'll deem the agenda approved as posted. All right, we're on to agenda item number 2, approval of the minutes. We have a set of minutes from January 24th, 2024 on page 83. Do any members of the committee wish to make a change? No. All right. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
So moved.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anyone object? All right, the motion passes. All right, agenda item number 3, discussion and possible recommendation on the proposed amendment to Washoe County Tahoe area plan to add schools, kindergarten through secondary as a special use within the Wood Creek regulatory zone for those parcels equal to or greater than 3 acres in size. Information on this agenda item can be found on page 225 of your packet. As a reminder to the public, after committee discussion on this item, you may raise your hand in person to be called on or in Zoom to be unmuted by TRPA staff to share your comments. All right, and we have received a lot of public comments on this item, both for and against. So, and we have all read them, at least I've read them. So thank you everyone for presenting those, sending those to us as well. All right, so now I'm going to pass it to John to introduce our speakers on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to set a little context on this for you and for the people listening. This is an amendment to the allowed land uses. It would allow schools at churches with a special use permit. We're not actually voting on a school at a church. This is just, again, like a plan amendment. It's not a project. So that will happen later if this amendment is passed. The two projects that we expect will come forward. Our St. Francis Assisi Church wants to have a St. Clair Montessori school. They have been issued a temporary permit and it expires in September 24. If this doesn't pass, that school won't be able to continue. The Village Presbyterian wants to have Village Christian Academy. They have an application in. Again, all of these continuing depends on you all recommending the amendment. The recommendation will go to the governing board. We've had a little bit of a different sequence in the process. You may remember in September of 23, this committee heard this just to get issues. We did not get it onto the Advisory Planning Commission agenda before it's come back here today. It will be on April 10th, and then it will be on the governing board April 24th. And that's probably just as important for those listening who wonder what the next steps are. Again, the action today would only allow those kind of applications to continue to go forward and would require a special use permit. Typically that happens at the hearings officer and can be appealed to the governing board, but that's where we are. That's what this is about. So with that, I'll turn it over to Michelle Brown from our staff, who will introduce it and our findings, and then she'll turn it over to Courtney from Washoe County. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Michelle Brown, Associated Long Range Planner for the record. We have a request here today from Washoe County proposing an amendment to their area plan. The proposed change would allow an additional land use of kindergarten through 12th grade schools on sites that are 3 acres or larger with a special use permit in the Wood Creek regulatory zone. TRPA staff have prepared a staff report summarizing this proposed amendment, and it has been determined to be in compliance with the TRPA regional plan and in conformance with the Code of Ordinances. This item has not gone to the Advisory Planning Commission yet. However, it is scheduled to go next month on April 10th and then to the Governing Board on April 24th. I'd like to reiterate what John Hester mentioned that to the committee, that this is an item. Today is not a project approval, but rather a request for a zoning amendment to an area plan. Having said that, there are the 2 current active temporary use permits within the Wood Creek zoning regulatory zone that would be affected by this proposed area plan amendment, excuse me. And that is the St. Clair's Montessori School located on St. Francis Assisi's property and is currently operating under a 6-month extension of that temporary use permit that is scheduled to expire on September 7th of this year, 2024. If this proposed amendment is approved, the special use permit will be required for it to continue beyond the 6-month extension. The other active temporary use permit in the Wood Creek regulatory zone was granted to Village Presbyterian Church in November of 2023 to create on their site the Village Christian Academy. And again, if this proposed amendment is approved, a special use permit will also be required for the church to continue this use. Courtney Weike from Weike from Washoe County is here, who will go through a presentation on the proposed area plan amendment and answer any questions. Following the presentation and comments, the committee will be asked to make a motion on this item. And now I'd like to hand it over to Courtney from Washoe County.
Okay, great. We've got the presentation up. Thank you, Chair and committee members. Courtney Weike, Senior Planner with Washoe County. The item before you today is a request from Washoe County to amend the Washoe County Tahoe area plan. And I'll do my best, to not be repetitive of the previous speakers here. But as suggested, the subject request is to amend the Tahoe area plan, which is section 110-220 .275, which would add schools through kindergarten through secondary use type as a permitted use subject to a special use permit on those parcels in size equal to or greater than 3 acres within the Tahoe Wood Creek regulatory zone. Kindergarten, elementary, and secondary schools serving grades up to 12, and there is no differentiation between denominational or sectarian schools, public schools for such request in the TRPA Code of Ordinances. Next slide, please. I've got a delay there. Okay, so just to give you an idea of where the Wood Creek regulatory zone is, it is the highlighted bright green color there. It's generally located west of Mount Rose Highway, south of College Drive, east of Village Boulevard, and north of Tahoe Boulevard. The Wood Creek regulatory zone is one of 16 residential regulatory zones within the area plan. These regulatory zones focus primarily on single-family dwellings, but do allow for other use types such as multifamily and a broad scope of public service and resource management uses. The primary vision for residential regulatory zones is to maintain safe and functional residentially focused regulatory zones with development that contributes to the desired community character. The Wood Creek regulatory zone also includes a designated special area on 2 parcels established to allow public service uses on publicly owned parcels. And those are shown on the very left-hand west corner of the regulatory zone. Next slide, please. So just a different way of looking at the Wood Creek regulatory zone. This is all of the Wood Creek regulatory zone. However, because the request is specific to only allowing the additional use on those parcels 3 acres or more, it fairly limits the scope of where this use would actually be able to occur. The parcels highlighted in yellow represent those parcels greater in size than 3 acres, of which the additional use would be allowed, again, subject to a special use permit. There are only 3 privately owned parcels, which are owned by St. Francis and Village Church. The other parcels are publicly owned. Next slide, please. A little bit of history of public outreach and process thus far and how we have got here. In June of last year, the applicant did hold a neighborhood or a community meeting. Notice was sent to approximately 198 property owners. 20 people attended in person. Public concerns included traffic, noise, parking, environmental impacts, fire safety, and possible potential negative impacts to the existing public schools. In June 8th, 2023, the subject development code amendment application was submitted. And to clarify, without getting into too much detail here, for Washoe County purposes, this is a development code amendment. For the purposes of TRPA, this is a Tahoe area plan amendment. And it's just the way that the county versus the TRPA adopts the various sections of the Tahoe area plan. September 27th of 2023, we did hold a TRPA at the time, our PIC meeting, and that was an informational meeting only. A TRPA did receive nearly 100 public written comments at that time. Approximately 36 were in opposition and 55 expressed support for the amendment. No public, that is verbal, testimony was given at the meeting, and generally speaking, all RPIC members expressed support for the proposal with no notable concerns raised. On November 7th, 2023, the Washoe County Planning Commission did hold a duly noticed public hearing, took public comment, and voted unanimously to recommend approval of the Development Code Amendment WDCA 23-001 to the Board of County Commissioners. In January and February of this year, the Board of County Commissioners held its first and second readings of the requested amendment and voted unanimously to adopt the Development Code Amendment subject to TRPA approval. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of background about the Tahoe area plan. I've briefly already gone over this, but there are 27 regulatory zones within the Tahoe area plan. The requested school use type is only permitted outright in the Incline Village Commercial Regulatory Zone and are permitted with a special use permit within the Incline Village Residential and Fairway Regulatory Zones. So fairly limited in the number of regulatory zones where schools would be allowed. Next slide, please. A little bit of background on the applicant to the county. Obviously, Washoe County is the applicant to TRPA, but this is in response to an applicant requested amendment. St. Clair's was founded in 2018 and is the only Catholic school offered in the North Tahoe area. In 2022, St. Clair's was informed their existing lease located in Tahoe Vista would not be renewed for the 22-23 school year, and therefore was in search of a new location. Since 2022, they have been operating out of St. Francis at 701 Mount Rose Highway under a temporary use permit issued by TRPA, as Michelle had suggested earlier. The second applicant is Village Church, which is also located within the Wood Creek Regulatory Zone north of St. Francis, and they too wish to operate an elementary school in addition to the existing preschool. The Village Church representatives met with Washoe County staff to begin the process to establish a proposed school use type, and were informed at that time that the use type was actually not currently allowed. However, staff indicated that St. Clair's was already pursuing a code amendment for the same purpose, and Village Church and St. Clair's agreed to collaborate and submit a combined application on the requested amendment. Next slide, please. So here is, here is the actual verbatim language that would be added to the 220.275 regulatory zone. And you can go ahead and click and we'll see the text in red there. So this is what is actually going to be changed in the area plan amendment. Under the public service use type, schools kindergarten through secondary would be added, subject to a special use permit. Please note that there is an asterisk indicating that it is only for those parcels equal in size or greater than 3 acres. As previously mentioned by both Mr. Hester and Ms. Goodman, if I have that right, I apologize. If the amendment is adopted by TRPA, Village Church and St. Clair's or any subsequent property owner would still be required to obtain an approved special use permit to establish the school use. The special use permit process is a site-specific review of a use that requires special use findings to determine if the uses have the potential to adversely affect other land uses, transportation systems, public facilities, or environmental resources within the vicinity. The special use permit process further requires neighborhood notification, a neighborhood meeting, and a public hearing, both at the Washoe County and TRPA has their own approval process for such a special use permit request. Last slide, please. Since the beginning of this request, going back to June of last year, I would say we're well over 200 public comments at this time. I don't have a final count. I haven't added the public comments that were included for today's agenda item through that were sent directly to TRPA, but I will say that that's a good relative number to refer to. As stated previously, there's a mix of support and opposition. And the public concerns predominantly surround around traffic, noise, parking, environmental impacts, fire safety, and the possible negative impacts to existing public schools. This was sent to all applicable Washoe County agency partners and Washoe County departments, and no concerns or comment were received in opposition. We do have Anne Marie Lane of Down Consulting, who's on the call on Zoom and is available for questions specific to her applicants, as well as any specific questions to the environmental documents that were prepared and reviewed by both TRPA and Washoe County. With that, that summarizes my presentation, and I am available for any questions or comments.
Great, thank you, Courtney and Michelle. I did want to clarify, you had said that there were no public comments made at the RPIC meeting. We did have a lot of public comments. I think we'll probably get a lot today. I don't know if that's at all critical, but
Well, I'm still on. Thank you. And I probably should have rewatched it. And Michelle, I think you maybe even had, I know we received a lot of public comments, but it was one of those really late meetings. And I didn't think that we had public comment at the actual meeting. And if that's the case, by the next meeting, I will clarify and make sure that I accurately represent.
No big
who
deal.
spoke.
I just
Thank
wanted
you.
to-
Thank you for that, Chair.
because I'm sure a lot of the same people will be back and we're thinking, I thought I
Okay,
I
okay. Thank
spoke
you
at
for
that meeting. Was no one listening? All right. Great. Well, thank you guys for your presentation. Do any committee members have specific questions or clarifications before we get to public? Shelley?
Thank you. Vince. So under the conformity review response from TRPA regarding established uses in established residential areas, it says that the requirement is to preserve the character of established residential areas outside of centers. I understand that one of the applicants is proposing to bring in modular buildings. How does that square up with maintaining community character?
Do you want? At this time, that is actually the first I've ever heard of that. And that is because at this point, we have no special use permit application before us. The county has not had an opportunity to review design, materials, how they plan to address parking, et cetera, with the proposed additional use at these particular sites. I think at that time, we would be wanting to make sure that whatever they are proposing is consistent and is complementary to the existing residential environment within that regulatory zone.
So it's alleged by one of the commenters that some of these temporary buildings have already have been moved on to the site, with or without Washoe County's permission. You know?
I am unaware of that. That might be in response to the temporary use permit that was issued. It's not uncommon for schools to bring in, kind of those modular style classroom units, and that might be a temporary solution until they, determine they have assurance that they're going to be able to have long-term use.
But it's
I was not aware of that, but
Okay.
if they should have, and I can look into this, but any sort of placement of a modular unit such as that would have been permitted through our building division and inspected for whatever requirements they have. I believe it's called a placement permit for those type of uses.
Okay, because there are potential coverage implications. Is it the intent? I know we're not reviewing a project at this point. Will this project come back to TRPA for review or not? It'll just be approved by Washoe County if in fact they elect to.
It would be subject to a special use permit by both TRPA and Washoe County.
Okay.
Which reviewing body of TRPA, that I would leave to Mr. Marshall to clarify. Whether it's hearing officer or I'm not. Oh, I apologize.
I'd just like to add, for the record, that a lot of the comments that do come in were pertaining to, the potential projects that would come from this area plan amendment, and that today we're looking at just the land use
The area.
zoning amendment.
Right.
for,
Okay. So but we do have a conformity review that indicates that there is no problem with the amendment, but kind of implicates the project. I mean, we have a general idea of what the project's going to look like or what it may look like. I know I don't want to drift too far off course here, John, but can I continue to get some facts clarified just for the sake of?
Yes, but remember that there's a subsequent decision-making process.
Right.
And if it's a special use permit under TRPA rules, it would have to go to the hearings officer.
Mhm.
And that's at that point, you would look to see whether or not the actual design of the project is consistent with the character as one of the special use findings
Right.
of the neighborhood. And it's those special use findings that allows you to make that finding of conformity at the plan level, at this amendment level, because that would have to be an affirmative finding at the project level. So
Right,
you
but
can,
only
you
if the
can re-
hearings officer's decision, let's say they approve it, is appealed to the governing board, right? So,
would it come actually to you?
yes.
Yes,
That's what I'm
correct.
asking. Okay. Okay, well, let me just maybe put this on the record. The other thing you had mentioned, and I'm sorry, I may have misunderstood you, that the secondary St. Clair's Tahoe facility is closing. Is that in California, did you say, in Kings Beach? Where is that located?
Courtney Wyke for the record, Washoe County. It may be helpful to bring on Anne Marie Lane of Dow Consulting to provide any clarity to that. But my understanding is that where they were previously operating, it was on the California side, and that they had been diligently searching for a new location, and this is the location
So
that
that
they
has
found.
VMT implications as well. I mean, if the kids now, if they're coming by school bus, that's one thing. If their parents are driving them into Incline Village from California, you know, that may be an issue of concern for subsequent review and consideration. But,
Correct.
right, okay.
We don't really know where they were coming from. When they were going to school in California, they might have been driving from Incline into California.
Well, but
as
there's already a
well.
facility here, though, in Incline Village. That's the existing facility, isn't it?
No, that's the.
Was
that's
the
new
entire
one.
facility relocated in 2018?
Remember, there's two facilities.
No, I understand, and one
currently.
was closed. Two, right, but the one in Incline Village existed concurrently with the one in Incline Village or in Kings Beach. No? Well, I need clarity on that then, I
Yeah.
guess.
If we could
Okay.
get somebody on from.
Would it be helpful if we had Miss Lane, who's most intimate
Sure.
with all the knowledge? Because I'm not even exactly positive when that year was. It could have been a couple of years ago.
Okay.
So I don't have that right in front of me. If
I guess
possible.
my concern is that, you know, are we compounding the VMT? You know, by if these two facilities existed concurrently, one was closed, the kids were transferred or would be transferred to this new facility, then there are VMT implications. So that's why I need clarified.
Right, but
Right.
again, those are really
know, the
project
project
level
related.
concerns, and
Right.
so then that's not related to your finding
You're right.
today.
But John, I want to put it on the record because I want it to be a consideration for
Okay.
Washoe County as they go through their special use permit process. If
Um,
they care.
Chair, I would love to address these concerns.
Could you just identify yourself?
Hi, my name is Anne Marie Lane. Good afternoon, Regional Plan Committee members. I'm representing St. Clair's and Village Church on the Development Code Amendment request that was submitted to Washoe County. Pardon for not getting the last name of the committee member who asked those questions, but I would like to clarify a few points. St. Clair's and Village Church will be submitting, if this is approved by the governing board by TRPA, will be, and they are in the preliminary preparations of submitting a special use permit application. At this time, both of those special use permit applications are to operate the schools within the existing building. It is the intent of these schools to submit that SUP application within the building. And that is in the next 2 years foreseeable future. If there was an expansion of a building footprint by any way, whether that was a modular unit or a expansion of the church facility itself, it would require an amendment to that approved special use permit, although that is not in the current plans for either of these SUP permit applications. To address the concern about the alluded to modular unit that was already on site, there's not a modular unit on site. There is a temporary storage unit that has been approved on St. Clair's to house educational materials for the school during the summer months when it is not being utilized as a school. There were, oh, I'm thinking about back to your questions. The question about whether or not there were two St. Clair's schools, one in Kings Beach and one in Klein Village. There has never been two locations for the school. So one closed down, their lease was not renewed. They obtained a temporary use permit and have now been operating of the current location out of St. Francis for the last 2 years. That being said, with concern about one thing that item that I would like to address is the concern that the school will increase traffic to Incline Village by serving out of town communities. And I'd like to put it on the record that that's simply not true. Of the 42 students enrolled in St. Clair's, 37 of them are Incline residents. My hope and intent is that I answered your questions and provided some clarification. Is there anything that I failed to address?
No, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You're very
Thank you,
welcome.
Anne Marie. Any other questions from committee members before we go to public comment? Nope. All right, then I think we'll open it up for public comment on this item. If any member of the public wishes to address the committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Are there any members of the public in person? Okay, great. Just step up to the dais and press the little head that's looks like he's coughing or sneezing or something, and then we can hear you.
Thank you, board. Thank you for all the work that you do. Courtney, thank you. I'm one of the applicants, the Village Church. I just want to let you know that our motive in doing all of this is to teach children about Jesus Christ, to grow up to have a relationship with him. And part of that relationship would have them being good neighbors.
Could you
And
just
for us-
identify yourself for the record?
I'm sorry, Tim Gilbert with the Village Church. Pardon me. Part of the thing, one of the big things that we'd be teaching them is how to be good neighbors. We wouldn't be able to teach them how to be good neighbors if we weren't good neighbors ourselves. These churches have been here a very, very long time and have been good neighbors. I would say for the most part. I can only speak to the church that I've been involved in for the last 25 years. When we have any kind of comment from the neighborhood, we act immediately to take care of it. That same response, the school would inherently have that same response. So again, I thank you for your time, and of course, I want you to approve this use. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Did you still want to speak? Yeah, please come on up.
St. Clair's on their modular units right here, if you'd like to see it. My name is Sean Comstock, and I have been a 30-year resident and live by the churches. And they've been great churches until they begin to put in more and more traffic and school noise. I live in the Wood Creek neighborhood on Mount Rose Highway, and we as a neighborhood are outraged by proposed zoning changes, which would allow two churches within a block of each other on our fire evacuation road to expand their schools. One of which plans to drop the modular buildings in an already crowded parking lot. We submitted a signed petition and are deeply concerned about increasing noise hazards due to illegal overflow parking, which I have pictures of the last 2 years with the 4 temporary permits that have been granted. There are We submitted the signed petition also of over 60 neighbors. We are deeply concerned about the increased noise and known traffic hazards due to illegal overflow parking on shoulders of the highway and on narrow, unimproved streets. We worry about the noise pollution and reduction of our property values caused by an influx of students, from many of which are non-residents. Quoting two Wood Creek neighbors against this attempt to alter the nature of our neighborhood and character of our neighborhood is just that, a neighborhood, single-family residential. You don't change a zoning to accommodate a few handful of families. Residents argue no one is opposing these churches' rights to develop faith-based private schools, just where the location is on our fire evacuation route within a block of each other, K through high school, right next to each other. Up till now, both schools have been operating under severely limited use of existing infrastructure. Both have been operating under ongoing temporary permits by the TRPA, which have become a nightmare. They have joined forces, both wanting to expand pre-K through 12, with each campus holding probably up to 120 students each. They've hired Dow Engineering, a land use firm, and have concluded this rezoning was justified as a public service and there were no adverse effects, which this is her report to the county that there's no adverse effects. And I'm submitting this to Catherine over here. Does Dow Engineering work for the churches, TRPA, Washoe County, when they conclude these kinds of findings? I support school choice and faith-based education. However, our neighborhood is not zoned to house schools, and especially on a fire evacuation route out of town. We have an excellent public education system in our town. The developers of Incline Village had well laid out plans as to where schools would be located and sold properties based on these zonings. In recent St. Clair School update, which I handed in, it is outlined to establish modular classrooms. In the past, according to residents' assurances, were made by the Catholic Church that this would not occur, that this is only going to be a temporary spot until they find a good place to expand their schools. Referring to 4 consecutive temporary permits, 6 months operating permits granted by the TRPA. It's been 2 years now. We as residents have been living this. Residents complain that these churches condone illegal parking along Mount Rose Highway and also along Kelly Drive and McCurry Boulevard. It is only going to get worse, and it's a matter of time that someone will get hurt, ran over, or killed. There is no infrastructure. There's also a runaway truck ramp right across the street from the church where we've had 2 deaths, and just last summer, we had another accident. So I am submitting these things.
Thank you, Sean.
So you folks know what has been going on for 2 years.
All right. Anyone else in the room? Okay. Anyone online, Catherine?
Yes, Mr. Chair, so far we have 3 hands raised.
All right.
The first hand up online is Will Phillips. Will, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Yes, my name is Will Phillips. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for taking the time to hear me. Hey, I was at the schools today. There's no modular units there. What the previous speaker may be referencing, there's some church storage, but there's absolutely no modular units being used for schooling. Just want to clarify that. Also, the comment was asked about maintaining community character. Look, these churches are at the edge of the zone near the highway. They're not in the neighborhood. They are part of the character of the community, and what they're doing isn't changing any of the character. So just want to clarify that. What these churches are doing hasn't really done anything to impact the community character. It's still there. Look, I support this permit. This agenda item, it's about 2 monolithic community issues: religious freedom and school choice. And I know the permits aren't going to say religion specifically, but the impact is unmistakable. This is really about religious freedom and school choice, and this permit is essential to preserving both for the families of Incline. The concerns of a handful of homeowners about their property values is valid and should be heard. We want to hear that. But there's no safety issue here. Multiple Washoe County boards have heard the concerns about safety and have voted to approve the development code amendment. There have been children at this location in these locations for decades, no issues at all. And I get it. There is some opposition, and there should be, and we should hear that. And in supporting the public good, where there is conflicting interest, we must look at the greatest good for the greatest number. And that is the idea that government action will never make everyone happy, but allowing for K through secondary education in the Wood Creek Regulatory Zone supports the greatest good for the greatest number of people in our community. I want to make sure I reiterate, it doesn't just add schools. It allows us to go from no options for faith-based education to having the ability to educate our children in a faith-based school. The question was about, are people being bussed in? Look, no one's being bussed in. I live in the adjoining neighborhood and my kid goes to school here. And the other families that I know live in the neighborhoods surrounding the schools and they go to school there. So this isn't about bringing kids in from out of town. This is about supporting a community need. So I want to be clear about that. And this small school, although very small, and these small schools, although very small, over the long term will yield tremendous positive impact to the community. So I urge you to consider the long game here, and that is the greatest good for the greatest number is allowing for a special use permit for these schools, which will improve the lives of the families, of the children, of the community. Really, there's no way to understate the importance of allowing this. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Will. All right, Catherine, next.
Next hand up is Debbie Larson. Debbie, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, so Debbie Larson here. I'm a 25-year full-time resident in Incline. My husband and I raised our 4 kids here. And I'm asking you to please support it because to characterize this restrictive, modest amendment as changing the whole character of the Wood Creek residential neighborhood and town, that it will suddenly pose safety dangers is an exaggeration. In reality, approving the rezoning would not have a significant impact. Please consider that St. Francis has been in the neighborhood for nearly 60 years, being established in 1965. It is part of the existing character of the neighborhood that perhaps drew many of the residents who moved there to the neighborhood in the first place. While the parish has not always had a school, it has had religious education on site for decades, involving the comings and goings of dozens of children. In addition to religious ed classes, the church has held weddings, funerals, concerts, weekly masses, involving hundreds of people. There's a concert there tonight, and for the local community. Many children come to these events, coming and going every week without safety incidents. That has been going on. It's simply unrealistic to think that all of a sudden, with the addition of a modest school or even 2 modest schools, safety becomes a serious threat. There's never been, to my knowledge, a traffic incident related to the church. I'm aware of the truck ramp incidents, very unfortunate, but they were simply unrelated to the church. And neighbor complaints have been rare with the exception of very vocal few. I heard from the school director recently. She wanted me to let everyone know that St. Clair's has a fully vetted emergency operation plan that has been reviewed by local police and fire. They are confident they can respond in an emergency or evacuation. Finally, I want to bring home the point that's been stressed, that these are residents. 37 of the 42 families live in Incline. And also I've heard it brought up, but never addressed, that we already have a school zone. I don't know if people forgot, but the elementary school used to be on Southwood. And I remember, because my kids were in school then, that they had to do some kind of rezoning to move the school to build on what I think was forest property behind Rayleigh's. So this is not a new idea. It wasn't originally designed for schools, because I did a project with Manny Sylvester, one of the original founders, and they never intended this community to be year-round. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Debbie. Next.
Next hand raised is Peter Larson. Peter, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, my name is Peter Larson. For the record, I am Debbie's son. I'm 25. I've lived here my whole life, and I am speaking in favor today of the amendment. I just want to really quickly make sure that we're clear on some of the points that were brought up by a prior speaker. Some things like the parking on the shoulders of Mount Rose Highway, that has never been anyone from the school, any staff member or any parent. It's only been members of the church. And we also, we received a noise complaint a couple weeks ago from a mariachi band that was playing for a funeral here. But the neighbors called the school and made a noise complaint with the school. But it was outside of our control completely. It should have been taken up with the church. So just want to clarify some of those details there, while the concerns are still valid. But I think the root of this all comes down to school choice. And I think the opposition kind of has this, they're pushing this idea that they're not against faith-based education, but just not here. Well, it's kind of a moot point, because if you are for school choice, religious education, it has to be at the church, especially for this Catholic school. And what we believe, the Blessed Sacrament of the Eucharist, is so important for us, for our students to be here. Like it's necessary. There's a long-standing precedent of schools being established in churches. And so it's not like we can go anywhere else in town. We can't go to some other lot. It has to be in these churches. So if you are truly for school choice, if you are truly for faith-based education, it has to be in this location. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Anyone else?
The last hand up is Anne Marie Lane. Anne Marie, if you'd like to make a public comment, please unmute.
Anne Marie Lane for the record. I'd just like to reiterate that this proposed development code amendment is a direct response to the increased interest in private schooling and the limited regulatory zones in the Tahoe area plan that allow for school use. Taking a look at state of Nevada 10-year comparison for private school enrollment, you can see that until 2021, private school enrollment across the state averaged at about 20,000 students. In 21-22 school year, we saw a drastic increase of 1,466 students enrolled in private schools across the state, which was a 7.6 increase in private school enrollment compared to the previous year. That growth repeated at approximately the same rate for the 2022-23 school year, which added another 1,506 students enrolled in private schools and was a 7.2 increase in private school enrollment. According to research done by a publication titled Education Privatization, Causes, Consequences, and Planning Implications, where a school has a captive market or monopoly, it is less likely it will respond to students' needs. In contrast, where families have a choice of schools, they will select the one that best meets their needs. The proposed DCA provides a potential beneficial impact wherein schools compete with each other to offer the highest quality of education. For example, the average student-teacher ratio in Nevada's private schools is just under 12:1. Again, parents have a fundamental right to decide what is in the best interest of their child's education. To address a few of the items mentioned earlier, as far as traffic, Dow traffic engineers prepared a trip generation review for the Wood Creek regulatory zone to compare expected trip generation of a K-8 school with existing trip generation of a daycare center / preschool. As found in the trip generation review, private school K-8 educational facilities operate very similar to daycare centers on a daily basis. This trip generation review concluded that adding the school land use to the list of acceptable special use permit land uses would be consistent with currently allowed uses. The proposed amendment does not include any provisions or changes that would alter the SUP process to evaluate traffic at a site and project level to ensure transportation, parking, and traffic generation are consistent with the expected or applicable limitations and regulations. Future projects implemented under the proposed amendment would require a traffic and parking plan to ensure all applicable regional and local requirements are met. It should also be noted that conditions of approval for special use permit can include restrictions on student capacity and hours of operation. The proposed amendment would not alter requirements related to noise levels, nor would it alter the community noise equivalency level standards as set forth in the existing area plan. The special use permit process would require additional review to consider the potential for proposed uses to create increases in noise.
All right, I
In
think we
sum-
need to wrap
Oh.
it up real quick.
Real quick, in summary, I would just like to put on record that the proposed amendment promotes the purpose of the Tahoe area plan by supporting the general welfare of the community, lessens traffic congestion by providing a mechanism to allow faith-based education to establish within the communities that they serve, and facilitates the adequate provision of schools and promotes the social advantages gained from an appropriately regulated use of land. In
Okay.
conclusion,
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, is there anyone else, Catherine?
No, Mr. Chair.
All right, then we'll close public comment and bring it back to the committee. Is there anyone from the committee who has a question or comment? Oh, I see.
Yes, Courtney Wakey, Washoe County, for the record. I did want to just follow up on the chair's request regarding public comment at the last RPIC meeting. Because as soon as you said that, I go, yeah, that does seem crazy. There was none. So I briefly read through the minutes and there were about 10 comments. What it was is there weren't comments in opposition. So going forward, I will make sure to make that clear and accurately relay that, because it's very important that we capture those comments at these hearings. So thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Great, thank you. Any other clarifications from staff or any questions from committee members? I don't see any hands raised online. Either of my flanking committee members, my small little group here. Oh, Alex. Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to get clarification. Do you mind, we're not moving on to the motion yet, but just clarifying that this is really about an amendment to zoning for that place. This is not project specific, right? It's really for this community being able to allow schools. It's not about religious choice or school choice. That I think there was some confusion in the
Correct.
comments about what we're voting on here.
Correct. There's nothing in the proposed amendment that makes a distinction between public or religious or private schools. But you can anticipate that the two schools, religious schools that are currently operating under the temporary permits would then come in and apply for permanent status under this change.
Got it. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Alex. Anyone else? I don't see any hands. Okay,
You know, I understand that I buried a little too far into the project aspects of the potential project coming forward, but you know, to me, for the environmental, for the checklist to find that the proposed amendments would not result in significant effects on the environment, it's correct in that the amendment would not, unless the amendment is acted upon through the project review process. You know, and then it may be our analysis may be different, correct? I mean, because there is a nexus between approving an amendment which permits a project that could in fact have environmental impacts. And so what we're saying is that the proposed amendment, just adding these uses to this particular geographical area, the act of adding them does not have an environmental effect, but it doesn't discount the possibility that the project itself may have environmental consequences.
Correct.
Right.
And I would add another layer to that you do as a way of determining the impact of the plan change, you can, and indeed, I think you must consider what projects would result, you know, kind of in the abstract, what kind of project would result from the change, from the code change or the plan change, because that's how you determine the impacts associated with that change.
Right.
But when you're doing that, you can reasonably assume that those projects coming forward will comply with all requirements, including the special use findings for compatibility, for example. And then you can base your determination that there's no significant effect on the conditions that the individual projects under that code section would have to meet.
Right. Okay. some of those consequences, environmental consequences currently are unknown because we don't understand the full scope of the project.
You can make reasonable assumptions that those projects will comply with the rules in effect. And if one of the rules are you have to make, the project won't go forward unless it's compatible with the neighborhood, then you can rely on that.
Okay, thank you, John.
All right, thank you, Shelley. Anyone else? Don't see any hands. That means it's motion time. Anyone have a motion?
Go ahead, James.
Move to approve.
I'm sorry. There's specific motions. At page
Motion to recommend
25
the
or up
TRPA.
on the screen.
A motion to recommend TRPA Regional Planning Committee approve of the required findings as described in attachment D, including a finding of no significant effect for adoption of an area plan amendment as described in the staff summary. Can I do both at the same time, sir, or do you want them separate?
Let's do one at a time. And actually this is slightly, I'm just gonna make one correction to the motion, that it's a motion to recommend the TRPA Regional Planning Committee recommend approval of the required findings. They'll make a recommendation to the governing board. Wait a minute.
You want to read that? It's just a little backwards on there. A motion.
Can you actually just go off of the motion that's on page 225?
We have his packet. I move to recommend approval of the required findings as described in attachment D, including a finding of no significant effect for the adoption of the area plan amendment as described in the staff summary.
Great, thank you, Shelley. Maria, you want to do a roll call?
Ms. Aldine,
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Dis, we'll circle back. Ms. Loomer,
Yes.
Mr. Settlemeyer,
Yes.
Mr. Honigman,
Yes.
and Ms. Dis. Mr. Chair, that motion passes.
Great, thank you. Do you want to make the second motion? The next one's clear? All right.
Motion to recommend adoption of ordinance 2024 blank, amending ordinance 2021-06 to amend the Washoe County Tahoe area plan as shown in attachment C.
Great, thank you, James. Maria?
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Aldine,
Yes.
Ms. Loomer,
Yes.
Mr. Settlemeyer,
Yes.
Ms. Dis, Mr. Honigman.
Yes. Sorry.
Great. Yes.
And Mr. Chair, that motion passes.
All right, thank you. Then looks like we are on to our next item, agenda item number 4, an informational presentation on adaptive improvements to the Code of Ordinances supporting climate resilience, affordable housing requirements for condominiums, and design standards for mixed-use development. Information on this agenda item can be found on page 253 of your packet. As a reminder to the public, since this is a no action item, public comments on this topic will be heard at the final public comment item at the end of the meeting. We have received some written comments, actually not a ton. So yeah, but we have received a few and have looked at them. So thank you to everyone who got your comments in. So now I will turn this over to John Hester to introduce Jacob to make the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This package of climate, mixed use, dark skies, affordable housing and condos et al. This, I jokingly called it the potpourri amendment. Anyway, that's what this is. It's really for the board members who remember the last year's strategic planning retreat, where we had a few smaller items that didn't rise to the level of being strategic priorities, but we committed to the board we would carry forward those amendments. That's kind of what this potpourri package is all about. I might remind you of, before I turn it over to Jacob, about the process. We've had a listening meeting if you want to call our info meeting at the APC. And Jacob got some input. We're here today for the same thing. Once we hear your input, we will turn around and start the formal process. These are, in addition to the input you provide today, I do want to remind you that a number of these items you've seen before, the affordable housing and condos, 10% item there in the mixed use definition, both came to you when you were doing the Tahoe area plan amendment on a condominium project there. So you've seen that before. And some of the more minor climate amendments were part of a package that was approved with the process improvements for our permitting and compliance function. And they were presented along with these by some UC Davis students. You may remember them. So this is nothing that's really new, but we want to make sure we have your input and opportunity to get as much input as we can from the public before we start the formal process. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jacob Stock.
Thank you, John. Jacob Stock, Senior Planner with TRPA. As John mentioned, I'm here to provide an informational presentation. We're not asking for any action or recommendation on this item. We're going to be looking at what we're calling adaptive management improvements to the Code of Ordinances, and that includes a number of topics. Climate best practices, implementing those into the code, some outdoor lighting standards and reorganization of that section, standards for mixed use development, and affordable housing in condominiums. So yeah, this might feel a little bit like deja vu. That's because I've presented these items to you in the past in different venues, both last spring and last summer. Now I'm coming to you with a more fleshed out proposal. We have some code language that you can review in the packet, and we're seeking your input and ideas on that proposal. So this is responding to board direction. As I stated before, these are all items that were prioritized by the board for us to work on, and we're coming forward with a proposal now for you to review and provide input. In your packet, it's divided into two parts. One part is called we're calling the Climate Code Amendments. This includes dark sky preservation as well. It's been in the works for about 2 years now. So quite a bit of process behind us on that one. The other piece is a mixed use and affordable housing component that came up during the Washoe Tahoe area plan amendment that you all heard last, I want to say June, maybe May last year. These are all aimed at adaptive management of the Code of Ordinances as new issues and new technologies arise. Part of our job as planners is to adapt to those changes. And so that's what we're trying to do here. Next slide, please. So a little background on the climate code amendments. If you want to go back to the beginning, these really started with the Sustainability Action Plan in 2013. It came out with a number of recommended actions. We've implemented 80% of those actions, either implemented them or they're in the process of being implemented. When we came to the board with asking for direction to implement the remainder of that plan. We received that direction, and you may remember a workshop you had with myself, with Devin Meadowbrook, and with Cameron Kubose, our intern at the time, where we worked through some of our ideas for integrating climate best practices into the code, and we came out with some priorities. Those included efficient lighting standards, standards for renewable energy, standards supporting appropriate EV charging infrastructure, and standards to address the impacts of large special events. So then after we had that prioritization session, we had a larger group of UC Davis graduate students come in. They had a seminar with us where they researched, gotten more into the nitty-gritty details of climate best practices in these priority areas. They helped us develop some code language, draft code language. They facilitated a stakeholder input process that included representatives of local government, land use professionals, nonprofits, and Liberty Utilities. So this resulted in a draft proposal, which they presented to RPC last June. We further refined and vetted that proposal after hearing your input. And we talked to members of the business community, of the development community as well, and got further stakeholder input. And some of their recommendations, as John mentioned, have already been adopted through our process improvements amendments. The remaining recommendations are what I'm presenting to you today. Next slide, please. So that was a lot on process, a little bit on the actual content of our proposal. If you look at attachment B in your packet, you can see the details of our proposal. This draws from local codes, experience of our permitting staff and applicants applying for projects through the code, the California Green Building Code, Title 24, Dark Sky Alliance, LEED. We drew from all of these sources in developing these amendments. One item we're proposing is a transportation plan for large special events. This is already a requirement of the city of South Lake Tahoe, and so we're proposing extending that to elsewhere in the basin. EV charging is another important piece of this proposal. Previously, the code hasn't really addressed electric vehicle charging, and so items to support appropriate EV charging include some definitions in the code, requirements for conduit in larger lots that comes from the Cal Green Building Code, allowance for transfer of coverage. And really, this is all designed to encourage electric vehicle charging as a distributed accessory use while still allowing it as a primary use. So facilitating that distribution for EV charging, which we believe is desirable. We also have standards for solar energy generation. This is designed to streamline the process for staff and property owners interested in installing roof-mounted solar on their properties. But while also including direct protections for scenic resources. And we propose to accomplish this through a qualified exempt status for roof-mounted solar with very specific reflectivity standards in scenic areas and color standards as well. We can get more into that if you'd like. Next slide, please. So the proposal also includes a reorganization of our outdoor lighting standards and new standards intended to preserve dark skies. This has been a long-standing priority for my department, at least, to be working on dark sky standards in the code. And now we're finally bringing a proposal forward. Long-range planning staff worked with permitting staff very closely, and we tried to balance dark sky preservation with property rights and ease of implementation for staff and property owners. I think we've done a relatively good job of this, but really interested to hear your take on what we're bringing forward, because this is quite different from the proposal that we brought you in June of last year. So this proposal includes a requirement for that outdoor lighting serve a functional purpose, that outdoor lights not splay onto adjacent property. It sets a color temperature limit for light. So think about white light versus yellow light. You can see a little illustration up here. You can actually see an illustration here in the building, as Chair Honigman has graciously pointed out. So yellow lights have less of a polluting impact on dark skies. So trying to promote warmer color temperatures. Large commercial areas are also large light polluters. So we're considering a lumen limit and a requirement to reduce outdoor lighting after hours on commercial properties. Interested to hear your take on that. And we're also requiring a lighting plan in the Code of Ordinances. This is already required, but it's not codified. So we're just codifying a policy that is already in place. Next slide. All right, switching gears to mixed use standards. So this is detailed in attachment A of your packet. The regional plan identifies mixed use development as a tool for energy conservation and greenhouse gas reduction. It's specifically called out in our regional plan. Mixed use is a relatively simple concept. It's the idea that multiple uses on a site that are designed to complement each other can reduce the need for automobiles. So placing services and residences nearby reduces energy use and transportation impacts and promotes walkability. That's the benefit that the regional plan recognizes of mixed use. So despite mixed use being an important part of our plan, we've not previously had a definition or specific standards for mixed use. This was highlighted during, if you remember, during the 947 Tahoe permitting process and the Washoe Tahoe area plan amendment that went along with that. So RPC, this body, directed staff to develop mixed use standards and an affordable housing mitigation for condominiums in the Washoe Tahoe area plan. We did that. It was adopted by the board, and the board further directed staff to pursue mixed use standards and a standard for affordable housing in condos at the regional level. And so now we're coming forward with that proposal for regional standards. Next slide, please. So our mixed use proposal is designed to achieve the greenhouse gas reduction purpose laid out in the regional plan. It includes a requirement for non-residential uses to be located on the ground floor frontage. Either 60% of the frontage or 60% of the ground floor should be non-residential. This allows for some flexibility while still creating the street activation, as we call it, of public non-residential uses. The language speaks broadly about designing for pedestrian access on the street frontage, limiting vehicle access on the street frontage, but leaves a lot of room for local standards and area plans. And some of the area plans already in place, the Tahoe Basin Area Plan in particular has detailed standards for mixed use development, none of which are in conflict with what we're proposing here. So these images illustrate kind of what I'm talking about. You can see the top image, the ground floor. Commercial uses are oriented towards the street with residential uses on the second floor. This image is from the Code of Ordinances from Cave Junction, Oregon. So this is not just a big city concept.
I thought you might have sketched it. So
No, I did not sketch it. Credit to Cave Junction, but that's a town of less than 2,000 people. So this is not just a big city concept. This is going on everywhere. And the image below is of what this might look like in the mountain modern design articulation that we see here. Next slide. So we also included a proposal for affordable housing and condos. This is again responding to your direction following the amendment to the Washoe Tahoe area plan. The governing board recognized the need to mitigate the impact of new market rate housing on our workforce housing gap. And so in this draft, we're proposing that 10% of units in condominium subdivisions are deed restricted, affordable or moderate housing. These units can be on or off site. They can utilize bonus units, including all of the benefits that go along with using bonus units, but they must be new units and they must be equivalent to 10% of the market rate floor area of the condominium. So we're not proposing an in lieu fee in this draft. So this was the same percentage, this 10% was the same percentage that was adopted into the Washoe Tahoe area plan. You may be asking where this number came from. The Mountain Housing Council and Tahoe Prosperity Center analysis found a gap of just over 5,000 workforce housing units for lower and moderate income residents in the basin. That's about 10% of the potential units in the basin. So it's roughly equivalent to that gap. The 10%, a 10% requirement can also be found in Placer County, and it falls right about in the middle of the range for the inclusionary zoning package that the city of South Lake Tahoe adopted a couple months ago. This proposal would not replace Placer County and the city's requirements, but would apply to jurisdictions that don't have their own equivalent programs. And we plan to explore other policy options for mitigating the impacts of development on affordable housing in the next phase of Tahoe living. So this adaptive management cycle will continues to turn as it always does. Next slide, please. So next steps, we want your input. We want to hear your ideas, hear public's ideas today. We plan to incorporate your comments and come back to you next month for a hearing to request recommendation to the governing board, and we'll be going to APC and the governing board, APC in May, I believe, in the governing board in June, if we stay on schedule. So with that, let's talk.
Great. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you for all your work, you and staff. Yeah, the potpourri is, it's a lot of interesting, fun stuff that will have a big impact. I mean, none of them are huge. Well, I mean, affordable housing is pretty huge, but together they're very impactful. So thank you. So any comments from committee members? Shelley?
I had a question on page 258 under draft mixed use code language. That would be 36.14 subsection B. I'm a little confused by the language. Let me see if I can reword this to get at the intent. In mixed use developments, a minimum of 60% of the ground floor or 60% of the street frontage shall accommodate pedestrian-oriented, non-residential uses, period. I'm not quite certain why we're dabbling in depth, because it depends on the user. I mean, some small commercial users, have a very shallow profile. Others require, 83, 100 feet. To a certain extent, that's going to be dictated by the uses, the design of the building to accommodate housing above the commercial floor, in terms of the depth, because what you don't want to do is to have units that are, shallow, and then you have dead space behind those units that can't be used for anything constructive. So I really think I'd feel more comfortable if we let the developer decide based on interested users what the depth of those spaces should be, and just focus on 60% of it, is to be used for a pedestrian oriented use, commercial use, 60% of the ground floor or 60% of the street frontage, and allow the private sector to determine what works for them based on interested retailers. I don't know if you have any feedback, Jacob, John, on that proposed amendment.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob Stock, for the record. Yeah, thanks, Shelley, for the suggestion. We'll definitely look into that. And if you have, I didn't jot down fast enough, you could send it to me. I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
Or is John writing it down?
John's got it.
Okay, read it back to me, John.
Shelley, I can give you some color because,
It wasn't that you had a change, you just wanted to know why there was a minimum depth requirement.
Well,
and
I
to
was
state that
removing
you
the
would
minimum
remove
depth
it.
requirement,
Yeah.
right.
so
And just focusing on the 60% of the floor
60%.
area or 60% of the street frontage would be committed to a non-residential use, and allow the depths to be determined by the users.
Jacob, is there a reason why we have the depth?
let me comment on that, because I pushed Jacob to to do that. It's actually very common. Almost every city's code requires a minimum depth. And the reason is, if it is, as a developer, you'll put in almost nothing and you'll get this little, sliver of retail across the front, because it's one of your lowest performing assets in the building, I guess, or investments. And so what we look for to make the community nice is to have, you know, these uses that enliven the street frontage. And so I don't remember exactly where that number, I think you might have gotten, I forget which city we just kind of started with, but that's basically what we have to do in all of our mixed use buildings in every community. And it wasn't the case previously, and then you'd get these really bad retail spaces that were totally token that didn't have uses. So it's usually better to let a developer do what they want, but as a developer, I can tell you what you end up having to do is whatever makes the most money. And a lot of times that's squeezing your retail down to almost nothing. So I think this is just a little bit of a safeguard, and we could play with that number and say minimum of 30 feet or something like that if it's too much, but you know, then it just becomes kind of hard to use it for a real usage. That's I asked Jacob to to put that in, so I'm the bad guy. So I'll tell you my reasoning.
I understand your concern, but on the other hand, you know, a developer doesn't want to have space that's not producing any income. So, you know, the likelihood of them leaving it vacant but you have to respond to market demand too. In other words, what does a retailer want? You know, some want shallow spaces. Everybody wants to maximize their frontage for exposure purposes, you know, others like, you know, long linear spaces. Actually, very few of them do, but so I just want to, you know, incorporate into the provision enough flexibility so the developer can respond to market demands.
It's a pretty common, I mean, that's a pretty common dimension that people ask for in retail. I mean, that's,
you know, we've got it at our retail shopping centers. We've got everything from
tiny to
spaces that are, you know, I don't know, what the space. We've got some that are almost 90 feet in depth, depending upon the size of the retailer, to retailers that want, you know, considerably less than that for a 1,200 square foot space, which is a really pretty common retail space size. But
I guess why don't we look at it some more and just think about what we'd like our communities to be and I think we have to put in a floor. Otherwise we will get the least that is, you know, allowable. I mean, as a developer, it's really hard to do anything that is not required by law, you know, unless it's really profitable, and retail, especially right now, is marginal in a lot of places. So
but so you don't want to make it even more difficult to attract tenants.
well, no, I mean, you know,
because you have to pick and choose. I mean, we've lost a lot of major big box retailers, you know, and I think we're looking for community retail that will service a need for the people living in the area. I don't know. I mean, I just, you know, a minimum average depth of 40 feet and a minimum depth of 25 feet, covering a minimum of 60% of the ground floor. I mean, to me, that's very convoluted. If you wanted to add a minimum depth of 25 feet, I'd be satisfied with that. Or it's either 60% has to be non-residential of the ground floor or the street frontage at a minimum depth of 25 feet.
I'd go with that if.
We'll get our measuring tapes out.
Yeah, I think you want to look at what it looks like, and maybe we can all go and
Mr.
look at
Chairman?
street frontages in towns.
On the subject, could we ask someone to come back? What percentage of retail space currently in Tahoe is vacant? Because I think that goes a long way. When you look at some of the rents that are required for a retail establishment currently in Tahoe in order to be able to meet even the property tax, let alone their mortgage, it brings forth the question is that if you require it, will they come? And I'm very concerned about that, where I can see other utilizations of the land. I mean, what if someone was to sit there and say, okay, I'm gonna have paid parking, but it's all gonna be on the ground floor? Does that meet the requirement of it being retail? I mean, they're charging for parking.
Well, it's non-residential, so that gives you kind of a broad latitude of uses.
Yeah.
Because it can be retail, you know, it can be an office, it can be, as long as it's non-retail. Correct?
Yeah, Jacob Stock for the record. We define ground. The proposal says the ground floor shall include one or more permissible pedestrian-oriented non-residential uses, and those can include retail, restaurant, personal services, office, and entertainment uses, include but not limited to. And so local zoning, it has pretty broad latitude to decide what could be permitted in those spaces.
Any other questions or comments?
No, does a concept, if somebody.
On
or-
that particular, I have further comments, if that's okay.
Okay.
I was just kind of curious if you get into the discussion of retail, what about the concept of low-income housing on the bottom floor? I mean, were we limiting things to the point of, is this an opportunity where somebody might have a concept of building higher costlier things on the remaining floors, but on the low floor, create some low-income housing potential? Are we limiting ourselves by not allowing that, or is that not a perceivable use?
I think I can speak to that. This proposal is just for projects that are permitted as mixed use. So in a situation where someone wanted to build, an affordable housing development, I think it would be, I would assume it would be more beneficial for them to submit as an affordable housing, a residential affordable housing development rather than a mixed use development. And I can't think of a zone. I can look into this, but I can't think of a zone in the basin that allows mixed use but does not allow affordable housing.
Okay,
I think
appreciate it.
James' question was really more, are we limiting affordable to just upper floors? Or is there a reason why we might want to allow residential on the bottom floor if we have mixed use upstairs and the bottom is affordable?
I think what Jacob was saying is then you wouldn't apply for a mixed use permit. You would just apply for a residential
So let
permit.
me rephrase that. Imagine that you wanted to build, what's our current height limitation? We can go to 4 stories. Depends on your, let's say you went to 4 stories, because on the 4th floor, you're going to build an elaborate restaurant that overlooked the lake that you're going to make a lot of money at. Just wondering.
At the top of Harvard's.
Yeah, we'll look in, that's a good scenario, helpful scenario that we hadn't considered. So we'll look into that, certainly. Thank you.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Any other comments, questions?
Can I continue?
Oh, yes, sorry, I forgot.
No, actually, I don't have a lot of other substantive comments. Let me just finish with this section. You know me, on page 260, under paragraph 2, it says subdivision of eligible structures greater than 4 should be units, plural. This is in the red line version, Jacob. Just add an S on the unit. So it says on 260, this would be under section 39.2.5F, and it would be subparagraph F2, starting with subdivision of eligible structures greater than 4 units. Got it? Okay, John's got it. Okay. And then moving on to your draft climate control language. In section 22.7.6 under traffic mitigation, subparagraph B, the last line. This would be page of our packet. There is no page, 262, I guess. 262. It says include plans for bike valet, shuttle services, comma, and ride share drop-off locations. Right, and then on 263, under electric vehicle supply equipment, this would be the second line, grounding conductors and the electric vehicle connectors, comma, attachments, comma, plugs, comma, personal protection system. There's just a missing comma. I'm assuming it's not attachments, plugs, so it's just.
And we love
attachments.
the Oxford comma here.
Yes.
We go Oxford comma all the way.
That's right. Okay, all right. And then I just had, those are not real substantive comments. I just had one, you had brought up under the dark sky lighting standards, commercial lighting, there's a requirement that commercial users reduce outdoor lighting to 50% or less of operational lighting levels. The big problem as a commercial property owner is light is a very effective disinfectant. I mean, when it comes to being a crime deterrent. So even though you may not have people in your shopping center who are shopping, their safety is important too. But without lighting, you are a likely target for crime. So I don't know if you want to reconsider that or whether, you'd give the operator the latitude to determine which lights, should be reduced in lumens. So just something to give some thought to. Other than that, Jacob, good job. Good.
Thank you, Shelley. Anyone else? James?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In that respect, I appreciate Shelley Haldean's comments around my consideration as well on when it comes to deterrent. In that respect, generally, it's more of a question of not the percentage of lighting, but the type of lighting. Especially as you mentioned, if you use appropriate warm lighting and it has a appropriate directional, it really isn't an issue of how much light. It's the type of light. So maybe we could look at that. One of the other questions, considerations that you had discussed was the limitation potentially of the color of solar panels. In the Nevada legislature, we had this discussion and we actually ruled it was illegal to do because if you are forced to go to a terracotta, it takes away 60% of the energy production. So I don't know if the technology's evolved since then. But once you get to the point of trying to dictate the color, it could reduce the amount of energy produced and all of a sudden it no longer becomes viable to do. And also back then, maybe again, I'm dating myself, it was far more costly to try to acquire terracotta.
Yeah.
I can speak to that really briefly. I wasn't clear when I mentioned color. When I mentioned color, I was referring to regulating the frame or the color of the frame around the solar panel and the mounting structure in order to blend with roof material or the solar panel material. So the regulations as proposed would regulate that frame and mounting color to match, and it would regulate reflectivity and set a limit of 3% in scenic areas, which speaking with folks in the basin who install solar panels, they said they would be able to meet that 3% reflectivity threshold.
Yeah, appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Anyone online? I don't see anyone raising their hand. All right, then I have a few comments, as you probably imagined I would. I mean, I have to apologize. My business partners find me totally annoying too, but so I think one thing on that, the 60% frontage, I think we want to make clear that it's like with glass or something, it's permeable, it's see-through, because we don't want it to be, boxed off and blank walls on the ground, something like that, or maybe it's 60% and with 50% glass or some level like that. You mentioned affordable, that this is not overriding other jurisdictions. Are we setting that 10% as a base for all jurisdictions? Do they have to meet or exceed that, or?
That's not what we're proposing, no, to set a base. This would be an alternative standard for jurisdictions that don't have their own standard, but a jurisdiction like the city of South Lake Tahoe, for example, has a scale that ranges from 5% to 17%. And depending on the project, they would be allowed to impose their requirement below 10%.
Okay, I see. Just wanted to check. And we were talking about the large lots and safety at night. I don't know if we could deal with that by those motion detecting lights. They have those in a lot of structured parking lots these days, at least in San Francisco, where so then if there's a thug prowling around, the lights are following them and they stay on for a while. But overall, that gives you a much lower average amount of light, so you might be able to achieve it that way. Just an idea. This one's a little nitpicky, but on sloping sites, I wanted to make sure that the retail is at the exterior grade, where the door is. Sometimes, so one of our first buildings, it wasn't. And so you end up having to have a lot of ramps, and it just creates a bad street environment. So I think if we can look at that just to make sure that the retail steps along with grading. Never do that again. Let's see. And then there was something in there about if you're redeveloping sites with affordable housing, we have to have the same number of units, but then we can add extra market rate, but the new units are deed restricted. Is that how that works?
Which section are you referring to?
I'm sorry, I read this and made my comments and I didn't quote that one. So, and I'm not going to be able to find it quickly for you right now, but it's where you're redeveloping. If there's an existing site and it has affordable housing based on an analysis of the rents there, that you have to replace those units one for one, but then you can add, I believe it was, you have to replace them one for one, but you can add more market rate housing.
Right.
Okay.
So that section, that is our preservation of a de facto affordable housing section. So we didn't really make substantive changes to that section. That's the changes that you see reflected here are adding our affordable definition to that requirement. So just updating that requirement to reflect our current affordable housing definitions, income definitions. So a change to that section would be another policy change that, I'm certainly interested to hear your suggestions.
Well, I guess,
Yeah.
it's kind of a double-edged sword. If, we don't want people to tear down 100% 50 unit affordable housing project and build a 50 unit market rate project with 5 affordable units. At the same time, what we see where we develop is it just means that you can never redevelop a property that has affordable housing on it. So I think we should look at that and see. I mean, right now I would bias towards protecting the affordable housing units and say that they should be replaced one for one, and then you can add additional market rate housing on top of that. But I don't think we want to make this so we can allow more affordable housing units to be lost through redevelopment. So I would look at that. Sure.
I think it's in Nevada. James, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but, and I'm sure there's something comparable in California. I mean, for example, there's a relocation provision. You have to relocate folks within 50 miles of where you're demolishing an existing affordable housing project. So they'd have to be relocated to another affordable housing project.
Yeah, it's still, overall, we still have such a shortage. There's no place in California or Nevada or almost the entire United States now that has a surplus of affordable units or even is affordable. I think, there's no county in the United States that one minimum wage earner can rent or buy the average
Yeah.
unit. So it just becomes the overall, they could possibly be relocated. I mean, we've already relocated apparently
Motel 6.
the
right?
Motel
If
6
they're
people.
Substandard, and you don't want to perpetuate a
Well,
substandard housing
Yeah, I mean,
situation.
but they were somewhere, and someone now is not getting those other units that needed them. So we are diminishing the amount of affordable housing, even if we don't like those units. Our ideals for what people should have, with combined parenthetically the lack of subsidy to provide what we believe should be the minimum, has led to a lot of the problems in our cities and places. So someone's substandard unit, or what we look at as a substandard unit, was someone's home, and they were potentially happy with it. So
But maybe the caveat needs to be, for example, in the example that you just cited, the Motel
Yeah.
6, it was in the middle of a water influenced area. It was environmentally sensitive. It was kind of an anathema to our environmental regs, not to promote the removal of that building and the restoration of the property.
that wouldn't be
So
limited.
it would just be, maybe it should just be a consideration within town centers. I mean, because that was a fairly remote, I don't know if there was any public transit that serviced that site.
This wouldn't apply because it's just for, if you were proposing to build a new building there,
Right,
then you would have to replace that number of affordable units.
right, 1-to-1, right.
1-to-1, and then you could add on whatever you were allowed on top.
Right, but there
Yeah.
have to be some
But
caveats. I mean, it depends on where those old units are located. Wouldn't you agree?
I mean, I would only like to see things developed in town centers, but
But if it's
been
located
told that might not be legal,
in
but
a sensitive area, that kind of
yeah.
contradicts our mission, our environmental mission.
All right, maybe something to
Okay.
look at, but it was just a question I had because we deal with that quite a bit. Then on 39.2.f or 2.5.f, it just says within a center, and I thought you should add town center, probably to be consistent, and make that more clear. So see, I caught something. I know, I was like, I gotta get one. And I think you changed in your presentation something that was in there. I think you had it that the affordable part is developed concurrently with the market rate. And in your presentation, you said the affordable must be completed before the market rate can be occupied. And that's much better language, just to make sure it's all finished off. You also have that it can be a mix of affordable and moderate. A developer will look at that. I think it's 1-to-1. That's the maximum that we'll get from this. So we just have to make sure that that's the standard that we want, because a moderate is so much more affordable to build than an affordable. So if we want it to be 10% affordable, we need to say 10% affordable. Because right now, what we'll get is 5 and 5. I mean, the land will be based on that assumption, because that's the lowest requirement. So if that's not what we want, then we should change it. And I think we went through rounding language before, but we round up 32 total units would require 4 affordable or moderate units. We just want to make that clear. Let's see. Oh, and I think it also says that lobbies and gyms are open to the public. We had allowed those to qualify for part of the ground floor usage in case retail, the developer felt it didn't really make sense. We just built a building where we were required to do the whole street frontage retail, and in a really unproductive retail setting. but we were allowed to put the lobby on there and count it as part of that space because it still provides some activation for the street and makes for a nice street frontage. But you don't want to make that a public space. Same with a building gym, I think, if that's for the residents. It does provide that activation, but it should be private, or could be private. I mean, unless they are renting to a 24-hour fitness or something. I think we require parking over, solar over, this is going on to the energy codes. We require solar over parking. But I think you have to say where it makes sense, just because some of a lot of these buildings will be U-shaped and things like that with parking in the middle, and they'll be partially shaded. So I think we just have to clarify that. Most of the laws allow for that in most of the states. On EV charging, I sent you an email that I liked the Tesla email that their comments that they sent. They had a lot of good stuff. I personally think we should go with the Cal Green standard. It requires more wiring and probably more actual charging spaces. But I think what we're doing, saying 10% for over 40 spaces is pretty low, given that California's EV sales are 25% already, and the Bay Area is about 50%, and that's a huge part of our people coming up, and it should just continue to grow. I don't know where Nevada is. And I know that's trying to adopt a California standard, but consistency is good. So people, are more clear on the standards. I'd go with anything, but I'd say that would be a good starting. And that's it. So sorry, it could have been a lot worse. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add really quick for regarding the EV capable parking spaces, just so that everyone on the board knows if you all want to, have a discussion about this. The Cal Green standard is 20% of parking spots in parking lots of 20 spots or greater. So that's the standard that's currently required under the Cal Green building code. And you can discuss if that's something that the
And
board
that's
is
just for
interested in.
wiring, not for.
It's actually just for conduit, so it's not even
Conduit, yeah.
wiring. So it's called EV ready,
Okay.
just putting in the conduit so that chargers can be wired and charging pillars can be put in.
Can be put in later. So I reached out to our construction estimator just to ask if things that I was talking about were going to be prohibitive, like stepping your foundation for retail at grade and wanting to put in more EV chargers. And what she said was running wire, because we are doing it on all our projects to the Cal Green standard. And she said running the conduit with wiring is about $200 each location, and a location can serve 2 spots because you run it to the center, and then you can go left and right. And the chargers are about $1,000 each, the pedestal and a charger. And if you do them double, it's less to put the other charger on. So just running conduit is not very expensive. So I don't think it's a huge burden. And I think this is coming, and it's almost already here. So I think we should be doing this because I don't think that's a huge burden. And on affordable projects, we've already reduced the amount of parking that's required. So there would be very few spaces likely in some buildings even to have to do this for. So I would recommend going with that standard. And it's just developers will just understand it because they've worked with it. So it's like less brain damage. Otherwise, you got to pay your consultant like probably a couple $1,000 to figure out that you can save $500 on not running it anyway. So those were my suggestions, and I'm not saying you have to do them, but you can take them or leave them. All right, it looks like Alex has a comment.
Yeah, I would just, second your comments about the EV charging. I think we need to push the envelope here, especially with the opportunities to like at least put in the make ready, because that ends up being really cost effective. When you put the wiring in as you're doing the construction, it's so much cheaper than going back in and tearing up a parking lot later after the fact. It also really incentivizes property owners to then put in the charging stations if they know that the make ready wiring is already there. So yeah, I think whatever we can be doing to incentivize more charging stations would be great.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? All right, then I guess we are at public comment time, right? Oh, no, this is an informational item. That's right. We no public comment. All right, so we'll move on then. So that brings us to agenda item number 5, upcoming topics. As a reminder to the public, since this item is informational only, members of the public are welcome to comment at the final public comment item. So John, upcoming
Thank you,
topics.
Mr. Chair. John Hester, Chief Operating Officer. You have coming this potpourri, so you'll be able to see, or adaptive management amendment package. You'll be able to see how well Jacob listened and was able to reconcile differing directions from you. We also have in the threshold standards world, we have a set of threshold standards that are coming, as well as a threshold review and update protocol. And I'll explain that very quickly. As the process of bringing some standards forward, there were some questions that came up from the Advisory Planning Commission about, well, questions like, how do we know when it's a threshold versus a regional plan policy, et cetera. And one of your members to your left, Mr. Chair, is on the Threshold Update Initiative Stakeholder Working Group, Tuiswig, and some of his words will show up in some of these amendments. So we have that protocol coming along with some threshold standards updates. From the city of South Lake Tahoe, we have tourist core amendments, Tahoe Valley area plan amendments, and a Colony Inn amendment scheduled a couple months out. Those schedules have been varying a little bit depending on the city being ready, but those are coming. And just a friendly reminder, we have the retreat. So we'll probably end up having some tweak to our what's prioritized or potpourri round 2 or whatever. We've been discussing how to package that. So that's enough to keep us busy till the retreat anyway.
Great, thank you, John. Any comments on upcoming topics? I don't see anyone online either. All right, then we'll move on. Agenda item 6, committee member comments. Any comments in the room, online? Nope, don't see any. All right, so public interest comments. Our final matter of business is our general public interest comment period. Any member of the public wishing to address the Regional Planning Committee on any item listed or not listed on the agenda may do so at this time. Individuals or groups who have already commented on items listed on the agenda are not permitted to comment on that same topic. The Regional Planning Committee is prohibited by law from taking immediate action on or discussing issues raised by the public during this public comment period. All right, if there's anyone, there's no one in the room. We've chased everyone away, bored everyone to tears. Anyone online?
Mr. Chair, there are no hands raised online to comment.
All right, then we will close public comment period. So that brings us to adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, motion passes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, staff. Great meeting.
Thank you all.
Right, Mari, am I clear to end the meeting?
Josh, you can end the meeting.
Okay.